Welcome to Man Baggage 5. It is like a radio intro, isn't it? This is live, although no one is live just yet. But I really appreciate those that have tuned in. Sorry, it's not working. Hi, James. Let me just sync in my Wi-Fi, otherwise I've got feelings. Sheen, if you guys can hop in the waiting room and I'll let you in, if that's all right. For whatever reason, my Wi-Fi is not working, but we're going to go with it anyway. How are you all? By the way, if anyone tunes in and you have questions, please do give us a shout. Hello, sir.
What is the story? We're both rocking the mustaches.
No, this is just a fashion choice.
I'm trying to get mine as majestic as yours.
No, do you know what? I've never actually given it a go. I've never done Movember. There's always been a reason not to. And I thought, you know what? Out of solidarity, I'm just going to go with it.
Yeah, it's sick. It's sick. I think I might keep mine now for a little bit longer.
Yeah, I quite like it. I've got used to it. Although it's not that practical when you're sipping and drinking.
It's great. It's great for starting the out conversations, especially when you're putting videos up online, because people are like, Jesus, what's with the mustache? Where did that come out?
Bring it back, I say.
Yeah.
How have things been? I'm just letting the other guys in as well.
Perfect. What is the story? How are we?
Hey, buddy,
Hi, David. You all right?
I'm good, man. How you doing?
Yeah, good. You don't sound quite as excited as you are. I don't know why.
Because I can't grow in the star.
It's just envy. It's
like
not,
this here's taken me like 6 years to grow, so really like holding on to it.
Yeah, thank you for giving up your time today. I think James, I'm just trying to let James in as well, hop in. And someone called it Sunny, which I'm afraid I can't let you in. Hi, James. You all right?
Gentlemen, good to see you.
What is
You all right?
All good, all good. Yeah, 3 out of 4 tashes is not bad, David.
Not bad.
Honestly,
But I mean,
it would take me so long to get anything that didn't look like I was 12 years old.
is my connection okay? Because my phone, for whatever example, won't connect to Wi-Fi. Yeah. Thank you all for giving up your time. I do appreciate that. I think you guys all know the premise anyway. For any of those tuning in, it is just I don't want it coming like a premeditated idea of what this should and this shouldn't be. More just to provide a space for blokes, men, gents to get together, have these open and honest conversations, because I think we talk about this strength in speaking narrative quite frequently. We've done all the raising awareness stuff until it's gone blue in the face. But what does that actually look like? What do the communication skills look like? Have men got those communication skills? Can men have these candid and open conversations without feeling a bit uncomfortable? Because, you know, some of these subjects that come up are uncomfortable. And I think with all the mental health side of things, as well as we like the airy, fairy, fluffy side of meditating, bubble baths or cold baths, whatever your preference. But we don't really talk about the other work outside of that. And, you know, as gents, I know you guys have been very open, and I find that hugely admirable in terms of your own roles with working with other men and also having these conversations. Yeah, I just wanted to open up that space. So I hugely appreciate your time.
Thank you for organising.
Yeah, man. You're welcome.
Minimal effort, but thank you for taking part. Anyway, just to get a gauge. It was actually something if it's okay to get the conversation started, David, I saw your post this morning about why is it men, and I'd like you to give more context. Obviously, that's a great little snippet to put out there. Why men avoid accepting accountability sometimes, and how we can better encourage this and open the conversation up.
Yeah. It's, you know, I'm a coach, so and you also coach. You know that this accountability piece is really important, and you also experience how men can be so slippery with their accountability. You know, they'll come to you with excuses of, oh, I forgot, I've been tired, I didn't do this happened, and like in terms of our life goals and stuff for accountability, it's like I see it as one of the key ingredients to success. It's like a willingness to be held accountable, like in terms of our life goals, because obviously then there's, you know, being accountable to, say, our partner, for instance, for the things that we agree on and say we're going to do and so forth. That's a kind of another layer of accountability. But I think I think there's a fear, you know, a fear of failure, a fear of making mistakes, a fear of not being successful, of a confirmation that we don't have what it takes to be successful and to make it. There's all these fears that come up, and they're not always conscious, the fears. What comes up is some overwhelm, some stress, a lot of thinking, a lot of overthinking,
Yeah.
and that's how they experience those emotions and feelings and so forth. But it's you know, you have to look at yourself. Like even I, you know, I've been realizing recently, I haven't been exercising. I did have an injury. I pulled a bit more. I think I probably tore my hamstring. So I haven't really been able to exercise for like a month. And I looked and was like, okay, this week, like I went for a run on last Sunday. I was like, oh, you know, I haven't been. I usually have like a weekly planner that I fill in. I was like, I haven't done that. Like I haven't been holding myself accountable, and I have to look at myself and have a conversation with myself. Like I haven't been doing that. Now, if I attach shame to that conversation, to like, oh, I'm bad and wrong because I didn't do that, then that's going to push me away from holding myself accountable. I'm not bad and wrong. I just did something. I didn't do something. In this case, I didn't do the plan that I want to do. And I can take some action to rectify that in the future. Or I can just have a little bit of compassion and go, yeah, okay, it's been a long year. I've done a lot recently. I've moved country and all sorts of things. So, okay. But I think there's that piece when we attach shame, we say we are bad or we are wrong, it really does push us away from this ability to hold ourselves accountable or to even focusing on what's important or our goals in life. I'd love to hear some views on
Yeah, I
this.
think
Not nodding there.
no, the point that jumped out at me when, literally as you started speaking, because I quite often find that sometimes we say we like accountability. Accountability sounds great, sounds wonderful, but actually being held accountable is something different. Giving another permission to hold us accountable, which sometimes means why haven't you done the thing that you said you're going to do? And we can meet that sometimes with like defence, you know, and that shame, and I think that shame is such a crucial part in that, because I think that brings about different behaviours in us that perhaps as men manifest itself in like frustration, depression. Sorry, James, you've gone.
Yeah, I wanted to echo what you guys are sharing and speak to an experience I had this week with journaling. And you know, as David, as you started sharing, mate, like immediately my thoughts were, yeah, it's the meaning that we attach to the behavior. So as soon as, you know, being held accountable is great, but if we fail with, let's say, meeting the terms of that accountability, it's what do we make that mean about ourselves? And that's where obviously the shame comes in. And, you know, the difference between, you know, I failed to do something, or I didn't do something, or even I did something bad, for example. It's a massive difference between that and I did this, so therefore I am bad, or I am, whatever the language is, whatever the narrative and the words that your inner critic uses to shame you. It could be, you know, I'm a piece of shit. Why am I so lazy? Why do I never do this? Like one of mine that came through, I had two big breakthroughs with just my journaling practice this week. One was just reflecting on the words of throughout the years when I was less conscious to those, you know, David, you described it as like sometimes we're not aware of the beliefs or the meaning that we attach to things, but the words that I would historically use whenever I, let's say, failed to meet an agreement I'd made with, you know, I tried to be accountable to myself and I hadn't done it. I'm going to go to the gym 4 times this week. The words that would run through my mind, and I didn't even notice it, were, what the fuck is wrong with you? What the fuck is wrong with you? And like the venom, the malice, the nastiness in those words, like if you heard 2 people and one of them was speaking to the other like that, you would be, I know I would feel called to step in and say, hey, that's not okay. You can't speak to someone like that. And so, yeah, the meaning that we attach to it. And I was reflecting this week on something came up and I was just journaling. My journaling practice is really very much sit down, write 2 pages in the morning. There's no structure. It's what am I thinking? What am I feeling? Just empty it out. And something came through for me, and it was a belief that I realized I'd been carrying since I was really, really young. And that was, if I'm not good at things, people don't like me. And that, the way that manifested is that I've always been incredibly hard on myself if I, for example, I don't know, was playing a round of golf and I hit a bad shot, or I wanted to achieve something and I fell short of the mark. It's if other people see me fail, or if other people see me struggling at something, I am so incredibly hard on myself. And I didn't realize that that's because actually I thought in order for people to like me or for me to be good enough, I needed to achieve. I needed to be top of the class in school. I needed to be the best at this or the most proficient at that. And I've been carrying that since about the age of 4. And by carrying that belief system under the surface, not consciously telling myself I need to be good at something so people like me, but everything in the way that I viewed myself, the world around me, through that lens, I realized how much joy it had robbed me of over the years. Because every time I never gave myself permission to struggle at something or to learn something or to try something. I had to be fucking brilliant at it. And the amount of pain that that's caused me over the years, was mind-blowing. I feel like I've gone off on a bit of a tangent with accountability, but
thank you for sharing.
yeah,
That's all very apt. I think,
yeah,
thank you for that. I think something that really stuck out to me there is this whole having to live a certain way based on other people's expectations and self-worth and just not feeling good enough. And I think not feeling good enough is such a huge driver, but also a huge imposition in terms of shame and how that manifests itself. Oisin, I know you've been on quite a transformative journey in terms of accountability and, you know, how you've changed things quite drastically for yourself over the last couple of years. Can you speak a little bit to that? And, you know, whether that's or any of that's relevant to you?
I suppose like a lot of my journey has been, I actually don't do any journal. It's actually something I probably need to get into. And like regards to things that have helped me out over the last little while, I'm always implementing new things that are going to help me out in the future. So like I'm still practicing getting more mindful and still practicing holding myself more accountable. There's still things I haven't done, like journaling is something. Therapy is something that I always go to. It's like a non-negotiable since last year. That's like my form of journaling. How I actually see it now is like, do you know the way people back in the day would go to church all the time? Now it's not so much a thing that people do as much. Mine is like every single week I have that thing of, oh, this is my church time. This is my time to kind of speak to someone, my time to journal in my head, let's say. So that's one aspect that's massively helped me out with reframing things, as the two guys were speaking previously about expectations and having such a harsh view on yourself and not feeling good enough and stuff. One thing I'd struggle a lot with would have been procrastination or like feeling like I'm not doing enough or not good enough, and laziness or whatever. And I'd always have that thing in my head of I'm not good enough or I'm lazy. And my therapist was quite good at reframing things to me. And he was like, he always reframes it, always to be laughing, and he does be taking the piss out of me every so often. But it was surrounding laziness, I was getting really down about, or always expecting more from myself, expecting more. And he's like, you have to be able to rest. Being lazy is just being good at resting. People who are lazy are actually, if you just reframe that, it's actually just being good at resting. So that's something that really helped me out. But I was in quite a dark place last year. At this time last year, it would have been like September. I remember specifically I was sat down on the kitchen table and I didn't think I was going to make it tomorrow. I had conversations with my mum. But one thing that I've come across over the last little while, and just with men's mental health and stuff, I think a lot of the emphasis is put on men speaking. So obviously people speaking, it's like, oh, speak up or talk out. I think a lot more of it has to be put on the emphasis other people of actually reaching out and asking people, are they okay? So one thing my therapist often does with me is when I sit down, he goes, how are you? And one thing in Ireland we'll always say is, oh, I'm grand. Every time the first response you'll get is, oh, I'm grand. And then he goes, how actually are you? And I'm like, fuck, I'm going to start crying now straight away. So it's just that's something that for other people I've started to do a lot more often. But even with myself, now I start asking myself that question. Because sometimes you wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, I'll be fine. I'll be grand. Or I'll be okay. It's like, how actually am I? And so maybe that's the aspect that I need to start journaling down. I was just thinking that there when you were talking about journaling, is that maybe I'll get a couple of mornings time, I'll just write down my piece of paper, how are you? And then write down how actually are you, and go on a spiel for 2 pages, as you said.
Love that.
Yeah. I don't know if that covered it. I feel like I went off tangent.
That really did. And I think like another issue, which I feel like I'm on repeat here, because I think it crops up quite a lot, this whole strength in speaking thing, but I think it's who is also equipped with the listening skills, and are other men equipped with the necessary responses? Are they equipped to deal with someone at the most vulnerable? Because you always run the risk in certain circles if you don't have that awareness of different characters, different dynamics, and how they play into each other in certain circles. Is putting yourself out there to be met with what someone would see as bants, which to you could end up quite cruel. If you've got your heart on your sleeve and someone shut you down, well, it's not going to warm you to that in the future. If you feel humiliated, you're just going to withdraw and do less of that. So it's sometimes not knowing what to say and just saying that is the best thing that we can possibly do.
Yeah.
Sorry, James.
Just to, again, like, jump in on that, because I've seen a lot of content around, the topic of vulnerability, and I've seen a lot. I mean, there's strength in vulnerability. Then there's people saying, actually, being too vulnerable is a bad thing, and the nuance is quite often missed. And I think there's talk about, for example, in a heterosexual context, man and woman in a partnership, there's like, okay, well, men want to be, supposedly women want their partners, their male partners to be vulnerable, but actually the men who've grown up not knowing how to be vulnerable, it's likely that women have, generally speaking, grown up not knowing how to hold space for men's vulnerability. So then you've got the challenge of, a lack of polarity in the relationship. You've suddenly got women who, have partners being maybe overly vulnerable in that space. And then it becomes, actually, there's more of a mother-child dynamic. There's a subconscious expectation for the partner. So, but then I've seen other people like sharing content of stop being vulnerable with your partners. And it's like, no, there's nuance, there's balance, there's a degree of vulnerability that is necessary. And absolutely, it's not all on the man just to be vulnerable. I think there is a lot to be said for being able to discern and judge where the safe spaces are for you to go. There's a beautiful saying of go where you're seen, go where you're safe, go where you're celebrated. And that's one of the reasons why, in particular for men, we talk about men's circles, men's spaces. That is a really, really vital part of the male experience. And for me, the most, probably the paramount part of male vulnerability is having spaces for men to go to share and be vulnerable. And part of that is to be seen and witnessed. Part of that is to make sure, that these spaces aren't just places for men to go to have their victim stories validated. Because sometimes, don't get me wrong, a lot of men are genuine victims of things. But often we can also then become sort of subject to a victim mindset and, oh, poor me. And then we go to these spaces just wanting to say, my partner's fucking this, and I hate my job, I hate this, I hate that, poor me. And actually, that's what, I guess, coming back to accountability, is sometimes it's about challenging those thought processes and making sure that men aren't hurting themselves more by staying stuck there. But yeah, absolutely, there's the vulnerability aspect as well, and being able to share. And obviously, and what you said about therapy, like I started with a new therapist again recently and shared with my therapist like some stuff that's been happening to me over the last 2 months. And she said to me, James, do you mind if I just share something with you? She said, you've just told me about some things that have happened in your life, particularly your relationship over the last 2 months. She said, that is so much that you have been going through. She said, but as you were telling me, it was like you were telling someone else's story. She said, I don't know how much of what you've been through you've actually given yourself permission to feel, because and I realized it, and I was like, oh fuck no, I've been showing up for my partner so much, I've been holding space for my partner so much that I haven't really realized the impact and the weight of what I've been going through in having to support her. So I then gave myself like 48 hours to just feel incredibly sad. And that was, again, incredibly therapeutic, incredibly healing. But yeah, just coming back to vulnerability, that's where like the benefit of vulnerability is. But I think it actually blends beautifully between vulnerability and accountability. You have to have both and a balance.
Yeah, that vulnerability as well. I think when people talk about it, they talk about it as in an effeminate sense, or outpourings of tears. But actually, I think vulnerability is just having an awareness of your inner workings and actually what's going on, and being honest. It's not necessarily sobbing on your partner's shoulder, which I think a lot of people would kind of frame it as. But that, I think with that conversation as well, and we speak with therapy, there's different therapeutic interventions, is we touched on how that manifests itself, like suppressing those things. We can almost develop this sense of avoidance, and we look to work, we look to unhelpful habits, booze, addiction, like porn, that's often one that comes up as well. We look to all of these different outlets apart from actually having to deal with the thing. And as someone we're going to talk to, I thought we could I was going to come to you though, because I thought we mentioned porn. I was going to come to you. Don't worry.
I was actually going to jump in on like the vulnerability piece. I was on the live last night talking about this, and it's really, it's like James said, it's really nuanced as a point. But it's like that the piece about having men to talk to in your life is so vital. Like I've been running a men's circle for a company called Men's Circle for the last 2.5 months almost now. I've been running that circle of men, right? And these men come, and they were all strange at the beginning. 2.5 months later, I've seen these men cry. I've seen these men support each other in different times, bring some of the most challenging things in their life, bring things. The number of times I've heard them say in the circle, I'm telling you this, and I haven't told anyone else in my life. I haven't told my partner, or I haven't told any of my friends, I haven't told anyone, anyone in my life at all. And another sentence that comes up a lot is, oh, I was feeling a lot of resistance about coming tonight, but I'm so glad that I came. I feel so much better for speaking and listening to other people. Because one of the things that I think is the real deficiency in people, not just men, in people, is listening. People don't know how to listen to each other because they listen through the lens of like, what does this mean about me? How are you attacking me? What are you saying about me? I need to fix what you're saying, what you're going for. I need to fix, instead of just listen and go, you're struggling. Got it. Like that must be really difficult. Like, how have you been handling it? How have you been feeling about that? Being curious about that person's experience. And this is the piece I think that we've really struggled with, is like being curious about someone else's experience when they speak, instead of it being a back and forth opinion. Like they talk about something and we give their opinion about it, and they give their opinion about it. And when we do that, conversations don't really get to any depth, because it becomes almost a competition of whose opinion is better, whose is right and whose is wrong. And this piece that men are really lacking in their lives a lot is being listened to. And I include women in this. I've worked with enough couples to have observed that like a man brings his deepest vulnerable fears, and in that moment, instead of being able to go, I want to hear you, she hears the fears through the lens of, he doesn't want to be with me, or there's something wrong with the relationship, or he's going to leave me, or something like that, and reacts to that feeling. So I think one of the really important things when we come to the vulnerability is being able to listen to people, be able to hear them, because I think men are speaking more and more. I don't think men are very good at listening to men. I don't think partners are always great at listening to their men either. And we have to also tackle some of the stereotypes that both men and women hold about vulnerability, because there's plenty of men and women out there that if their partner comes to them with some sharing or upset or crying or tears, like in their mind, they emasculate the man. They're like, oh my God, a man shouldn't be like crying about his grandfather's just died. Or like, this man isn't made to hold me in my difficult times because he's cried. It's like, it's looking at some of these narratives we have and being like, actually, that's rubbish. And that's my own kind of internal, like toxic masculinity that's at play here, that I'm projecting onto my partner, like not necessarily, him trying to bring that. And I know a lot of men's biggest fears is not being a good enough man. So if there's a risk that being vulnerable could lead to someone believing he's not a good enough man, a lot of men are not going to take that opportunity. But yeah, the listening piece, like I think speaking isn't really people's problem. I think listening is the problem we don't know how to do. We're not like schooled in how to listen to people. Like as becoming a coach, it's really, really shone a light on so many of my friendships, so many of the people I meet, and the incapability of actually listening to kind of understand and be curious.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, and actually, James, you put it beautifully. But the more crass way I've described it in the past is that it's not necessarily a slight on anyone else, but there are certain relationships that serve different purposes in your world. And I've got some amazing friends that I've been friends with since I was 11, since school, and they would be there in a heartbeat. I know I could call upon them for anything, but also know they don't necessarily have the skill set to respond to me how I'd like to be responded to when I was struggling with something maybe emotionally, and I'd likely to be a bit disappointed by that response. So I don't impose myself on them, but I do know there are other relationships in my life that I, as best as I can to go for that as well.
Yeah, I like that. As I say, it's the ability to discern where someone has the skill set, the ability, the emotional intelligence, the capacity. Because sometimes, you might have a friend, for example, that is your go-to when you're in it and you're going through the shit. the darkness is around you and you need that person, they might be the person, but they might be having a bad time. They might be going through it, and you reach out and maybe they ghost you because they're going through some shit, right? It's all about, I guess it comes down to that ability to also not take things personally. And then, yeah, have a toolkit, have your arsenal of like resources, your toolkit, your things, your people, your, right, I'm going through this, what do I need? And I guess that's just that one of the things that men are not good, and we were, you know, began to sort of come onto the topics of vices, things like porn, is there's so much that men don't realize that they're using to self-soothe and self-numb and distract themselves from the feelings, the kind of the mechanisms at play internally, emotionally. But being able to drop into that and actually tune into what's going on internally. So, you know, a lot of us, like, I mean, I was excited to jump into the porn conversation. David, I know you've been speaking, you know, you speak like quite a lot about this, like as a vice, you know, men learn to use it very, very subconsciously, but a lot of the time it becomes, yeah, like, let's say someone, you know, identifies that they've got an addiction to porn or a reliance and a dependency on porn. Well, they see that behavior and they see that as faulty or problematic, or there's something wrong with me. And when you reframe that through a non-judgmental, and you actually get curious and you start saying, well, how is that behavior serving you? How is it actually benefiting you? What is the positive intention of that behavior? Usually it's to numb, soothe, distract from an inner conflict, an emotional turmoil, a challenging relationship, an argument with a partner, I don't know, a pressurizing parent, whatever's going on in their life. And it's just that part of them, it's their best attempts to soothe it. So yeah, it's, don't get me wrong, I can't remember what tangent I was going off on there, but yeah, it's, I think a lot of it is about, yeah, removing the shame, not allowing things like porn addiction or whatever it is to mean something bad about ourselves, and come back to that curiosity. How is this serving me? Why am I doing this? Not like, God, why am I doing this? It's why am I doing this? It's that different feeling to it.
Yeah, I think there's the point that really sticks out to me, and I come across it a lot of the work that I do, and probably myself over the years, is that although I've never had a porn addiction, I'm probably sure if I didn't have it with exercise or controlling food or with work, which definitely have been points of avoidance for me over the years, maybe it would have been. But rather than treat ourselves like we're defective or there's something wrong with us, it's actually that's provided safety. That's a protective mechanism of sorts at that time. So I know over recent years that's been work. You know, like I've just immersed myself in like 70-hour working weeks because I'm busy, like, and I should be. And I think this productivity hacking and physically embodying a certain manly look, being super aligned with how you want to train and how you want to nourish your body, and this entrepreneurial spirit, they all kind of lend themselves really well, especially in the fitness space. You've got to be jacked. You've got to, you know, be meticulous with your food. You've got to train a certain way, and you've got to be entrepreneurial minded. You know, all of these things come together, and I don't know. I don't know whether it's a helpful narrative, and again, the answers are often in the nuance in between, right? Because we want people to be physically active. We want people to be concerned about how they nourish their bodies. But when we start leaning on them as control variables to provide safety, it's like I always try to distinguish it between separating the behaviour and the intent. So healthful behaviours like exercising, like being concerned with how you nourish your food, like being having a great work ethic and applying yourself to your business, all hugely admirable things. But what's the intent now? If it's a compulsion and you feel like if you're not doing that, you know, you should feel shameful. You should feel like you're not good enough. You should feel like you always need to do more. That's kind of the distinguishing thing, I think, for me. I mean, I hate to put people on the spot, but is there something that you feel like you've lent on over the years, like whether that's booze, whether that's work, whatever that may be, something which you found helps you avoid perhaps what you're feeling at that time?
I just want to say, I've got to jump off, guys. been a real
Okay,
pleasure
thank
to talk as
you
always.
for your time,
Well,
mate.
podcast
Appreciate
to
it.
jump into.
No worries.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Great to
See
see
you
you,
again.
brother.
Cheers.
See you again
Cheers,
soon.
man.
We're definitely not judging you for avoiding the question, David. Definitely not. I'm just going to tell everyone you've gone off to watch Paul.
Definitely.
So, I didn't mean that. It just seemed like perfect timing.
Yeah, I'll share mine. I mean, patterns of behavior that I've recognized definitely are within relationship. I will a compulsion or something that I've struggled with is I will jump at any opportunity to try and fix my partner to avoid fixing myself. So that's like a relation, like an attachment dynamic that kind of is very much entrenched in kind of shame, identity. But no, I've definitely used like self-pleasuring, masturbation, porn at times to self-soothe and to distract and to numb. Sex is one, like whether I'm in partnership, whether I'm, dating and gone through periods of promiscuity and yeah, like for want of a term, shagging about. That has been perpetuated by, let's say my mid-late 20s friendship groups where actually that was quite celebrated. It was, like it's very much within lad culture. If you're fucking around and you're shagging a few girls or whatever you're doing, it's like, I'm getting a lot of reward for this. I'm getting celebrated for this. I'm getting like social status for this. So yeah, like all of those things. I think sometimes things can be very self-serving and self-abandoning at the same time. And again, it comes back to that nuance. You mentioned being incredibly productive and entrepreneurial. It could very easily be something that equally serves you really, really well, and also is you running away from something. A client of mine who is in a very, very similar, he's a hybrid performance fitness coach, ultra marathon athlete, incredible physique on him. He's a fitness coach. And at the beginning of our time working together, I remembered how much he really identified that like relentless drive, that endless need to succeed and better yourself and be more and do more. And I got curious with him to see the other, like the double-edged sword. So you've got it's obviously benefited you, it's obviously served you in so many ways, but is there a flip side to it where it's actually, hindering you in some way or harming you in some way? Is there another side to it? And he wouldn't at the beginning, found it really, really hard to get curious about it. He was like, no, it's just a positive. It's something that I identify deeply with. It really helps me. But you have the conversations, you start to ask those probing questions with curiosity, and then it became actually a lot of that drive comes from, part of his upbringing, running away from a life and a father who caused a lot of emotional abuse and harm, and he was endlessly trying to prove himself in order to prove to himself, but deep down prove that, for example, to his father, that he was worthy and loved and that he was good enough. So it was both. And that's also okay. It's never, we don't want to get into a binary way of thinking. We always want to remain curious to the benefits as well. But it's usually the surface level, we usually see the benefits or the obvious harm, but we might not see the stuff that's below the surface.
Yeah. That social reinforcement part of that conversation is essentially incentivized, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, you look in fitness, for example, is people that identify as a bodybuilder or a crossfitter, is that they're so tied to that, it almost becomes a whole sense of worth, a whole sense of self as well. And yeah, with that social reinforcement is whether, arguably you've got someone who's jacked 365, meticulously like flicking grains of rice off the scales, which, by the way, I've been there, I've done that. I've had round of applause for having a certain physique and getting on the stage and things like that. But at the time I can acknowledge now on reflection, what was actually holding me there was actual insecurity and worries about, and also part of our industry as well is worrying that you have to look a certain way. But recognizing objectively you don't need to look a certain way doesn't stop all the social reinforcement and everyone around you saying, yeah, you should look a certain way, you should be jacked, you should have a six-pack 365. And I found, especially coming into the industry, a huge amount of pressure to aspire to be like that, because everyone I looked up to, that's what they were doing. To be positioned as an authority, like to get speaking gigs is, well, you had to have a six pack, you had to do photo shoots, you had to do that. Fortunately, I think things are shifting now, but I think there's still an element of that. And I think like this whole conversation around masculinity is this embodiment of what it is to be a bloke as well, what it is to be a man and what it is to be manly.
What's everyone's I love because the masculinity conversation is one that I find really interesting. I was a guest on a podcast recently, and we were discussing the definition, like how we define it. And obviously there's millions of definitions, like what does masculinity mean to us, right? And I would love to hear like what you guys think about that. It's a tough question, but like, what does masculinity mean to you guys?
Sure, mate, let you go first.
I feel really put on the spot because I'm actually bad at putting things into words, as in like getting it out.
Sure.
Yeah, what would I say being a man is like? I don't know. I actually resonate with a lot of. I was just kind of sat back there and listening to a lot of what you guys were saying, and a lot of what was coming up was like good enough, and like the feelings surrounding having to be a certain way or expectations. And I suppose like the question I always ask myself is, what is good enough? What is this side of things? I know that's kind of going off another tangent, avoiding your question.
No.
So,
That's part
yeah,
of it,
so like often things that I sit down and
capable.
yeah, and I think it's always the expectation that you have to be this guy that doesn't have any emotion, that can just deal with everything and just push on forward. Especially, I suppose, being a little bit younger and say only starting out my business now and pushing on is like I have to keep working harder, work hard, and it's the mindset you see online nowadays with everyone putting their Instagram reels together of their 75 hard or in ice baths at 4 a.m. and all this sort of stuff. That would be the definition that you see on social media as a man. But the real definition that I would see as a man is, I don't know, like I feel like being there to support everyone and being there to support myself would be one thing that I would class as, if I was to get to the end of my life of being a man, I'd be like, okay, did I support all of those around me, my family and everyone else? That's something I would see. But I don't know.
I love that.
Yeah, I think part of it is that element of choice and your own interpretation. And actually, even when I hear things like toxic masculinity, which, like, don't get me wrong, there are unfavourable aspects of certain men and things I think hold us all back. But I don't want toxic as a descriptor that's on the tip of my daughter's tongue, for example. I don't want her growing up thinking other men are toxic. But also, I don't think anyone can clearly define what masculinity is, because same as feminism, it's about choice, right? It's how you define it, and it's actually having the choice means you can live a life that is aligned with you, your authentic self, and being the sort of person that you want to be without being imposed by someone else's imposition. So to be vague and sit on the fence, we can be all these things, you know. At times I'm aggressive, you know, because I am for my sport. At times I'll be dominant. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is part of it. But equally times I can be hugely empathetic, I can be compassionate, I can be soft, I can be kind. I will cry at a Disney film sitting there watching it with my kids. Like, it's all of these things. And I think often the distinguishing feature is how we talk about them, the words that we use between the sexes is not actually that anyone can tell me, like, you know, I seriously challenge anyone out there. And I'm always, sorry, got me off on a rant now.
Love it.
My pushback generally in life, as someone that almost has a bit of reactance to being, and whether this is a rebellious streak from when I was younger, being told what to do and what I should be, is I'll be whatever I want to be. You can't, no one can define that one thing for you. Yeah, no one can tell me what healthy looks like. No one can tell me what fitness looks like. No one can tell me what successful looks like, because I have to define that to myself. If I'm to lead a happy and fulfilled life, I have to find my own definitions of that. Otherwise, I'm just living to someone else's standards.
I didn't intend for that to be a trick question, but you've answered it the way that I would have. And no, like your definitions, guys, or your perspectives on that are stunning, because I shared something maybe a week or two ago that said masculinity is an expression, it's not a framework. Masculinity is an art, not a science. It's subjective, it's yours to define, not theirs. And my take on that was similar to what you said, Dan. It was, you know, if we are to take the binary of masculine and feminine, right? A lot of coaches, David speaks to the masculine and feminine in some of his work, and he does it beautifully. I think when you talk about energetics, of like a masculine energy, feminine energy. I kind of get that, but it's problematic for me in ways where we say things like, okay, so if we were to gender the term strength as masculine, for example, like, you know, manly, strong, feminine, soft. Well, are you telling me that, you know, when a man, you know, when a man is soft and gentle, do we say he's in his feminine, or do we appreciate his masculine softness?
Yeah.
When a woman is strong, do we say she's in her masculine, or do we appreciate her feminine strength? Like that for me is the biggest pushback. And there'll be nuance, and there'll be someone might hear this and go, that's not what I mean, and I get it. But that is one of the problems of where if we label anything feminine for a man, not that that's a bad thing to be a feminine man, but if we start defining and labeling things as feminine, I actually think if you are a man and you identify as a man, anything that you do is your version, your expression of being masculine. And so, Dan, I love what you said there. And yeah, it's, as I say, it's, don't tell me what it is. I define that for myself as an expression.
I think that's applicable. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's applicable to so many facets of life, because we often hear about what it is to be successful, but if you're placing your success on someone else's values, how they live their lives, that's never going to be your definition of success. You know, and in whether that's especially again in the fitness space, it's looking a certain way, it's earning a certain amount of money, whereas, you know, well, a lot of these things, they're an infinite pit, right? We're constantly moving the goalposts. So if you tell me, I don't know, like earning 200k a year is the aspirations I have, but that's at the cost of all my friendships, my relationship, time with my children, that's not success, you know? And while some people might get a kick out of that, that might be their aspirations of life. That is their version of success. That's never going to be mine. You know, and I think people use the phrasing, comparison is the thief of joy. Thief of joy, that's the one. I prefer to think of it as like the poison chalice. It's just the more that we do that, the more we sip from that cup, the more we compare ourselves to other people, because naturally we're going to compare ourselves. But if we get immersed in that world of constantly comparing ourselves, constantly comparing the other facets of their lives to ours, that is a life of unhappiness, I think. And I know you kind of referenced it, Oisin. That's why I'm going to ask you directly. Yeah. And don't make me feel too old. I don't need to know your age or anything. But I think, like you said, like you're more formalising things now as you've stepped into the industry and you see these things around you. Do you find it influences you much in terms of how you define things, or do you feel like you're quite aware of like what makes you happy, what makes you want to live a fulfilled life?
Definitely recently is something I've become more aware of, because so before say January there, I obviously had not a huge following online. I had maybe 2,000, and then after Christmas it blew up to like 500,000. So automatically I started associating my self-worth, a lot of my stuff, with my following count. And when you initially blow up, obviously it starts to come back down after there for a little while, and I started to associate a lot of who I was with that. And I was going to therapy at the time. Thank God I had him, so he was going back and forth with me. And as you were talking about, even in the fitness industry, sometimes people can associate their whole self with their body or the way that they look. Luckily that was never me, because I feel like that would be even harder to get out of. At least with me, I could just drop my phone for 2 weeks and be like, okay, what's it like to live without social media? And so I did that. Even when I had a large phone, I was like, okay, who am I without this? Who am I as a person that isn't associated with this? And even with my jiu-jitsu, like I was hell-bent, because you were talking about here, what do you use to what would you go to deal with certain things, or what way would you go? And for me, it's the sport aspect. Is like, I just delve. If I'm not feeling great, it's like I have to go to jiu-jitsu today. And I was injured, and I was like, what the fuck can I do without that? So who am I without jiu-jitsu? And so I think they're the questions that I always ask myself. And like, it sounds so cringe, but Tyson Fury quote that I always relate back to, I have it written up on my whiteboard. I actually always write quotes on my whiteboard that stick with me. And it's like, at the end of the day, we like, everything that we have here is gone at the end. So like, with regards to my social media following, it'll be gone in a few years. It's not that big of a deal. And who are you? What type of person are you outside of that? Like, who are you to your family? Who are you to the people around you that you really care about? I don't know if that answers the question you're kind of asking. If not, you can ask again. Sometimes I struggle, I think, with understanding and then also putting across my exact message. That's it.
Do you know what? Not that you need to hear this from me, and I'm definitely don't mean this in a condescending sense. I think you answer the question perfectly. Even if you're not but no, I think there's so many incredible facets there, and I often use this. I create like this little meme thing, and it's just a guy lying on his deathbed, and like a little thought bubble coming out. At least I had 1 million followers and an amazing. But that's not the stuff you reflect on,
Yeah,
is it?
it's funny because actually, even just talking to you here in this call, so I'm automatically when I'm in on this call, because you guys are so well versed in this area, like with the journal and stuff like that, I'm automatically on this level here and everyone else is here. When meanwhile, like, I'm still a person here in this call, so realistically, I should be like, oh yeah, that's the way I answered that question. But for me, I'm still growing, so I'm still learning these sort of things. I think, like, as men, we expect to always have everything perfect or always have everything sorted, or always have to be great or brilliant. And that's actually one thing that jiu-jitsu has helped me get better at, because when you start that, you get better up all the time. You have no ego when you're leaving. And so for me, even here in a call, this is actually learning for me to be like, okay, Oisin, you have a valid message, you have something that you can say, rather than holding myself back all the time, or maybe putting myself down below everyone else. And so that's something that I'm still working on. I think everybody has things that they should constantly work on, or look at different facets that they should go forward with.
We're all learning from each other.
Yeah.
I've come on this, I'm learning from you guys, because we're all here.
Yeah.
Like, no,
Sometimes it feels like this, because I'm like, oh fuck, I'm still learning so
man,
much. Even on this call, I don't know if anyone else is watching this notes. I have notes.
no, mate. Like, honestly, don't, hopefully, like, doing this, and this is part of it, right? This is part of why I wanted to do this thing, because there is this. I think there is this dynamic about where people sit in certain hierarchies and stuff, and I just, for the sake of these conversations, this is a level playing field, right? We're all men. We've all got experiences. Like, it doesn't matter who's versed in what. It's this open and honest conversation that we're having. That's the important thing, and I think it's important for the people to witness how we navigate this dynamic. That we don't all know. Well, we don't know each other well at all. This is the first time we've had a proper. For the sake of anyone watching now, like, although I've spoken to both these guys, this is the first time I've had a proper conversation with them, right? And this is the first time we're actually speaking about things quite candidly.
Yeah.
Hopefully they don't think anything less of me from some of the stuff that I've shared. I certainly don't think less of anyone else. And, I think that goes towards cultivating better relationships longer term. And we speak about relationships between men and intimacy between men. Like, people talk about intimacy as in a sexual sense all the time, but I think there's emotional intimacy. There is a certain security and safety. And I do think men need intimacy from other men. Maybe not in certain respects, or maybe they do want to, if that is your theme. But I think intimacy, the conversation around it always goes towards. But, I think it's important in any kind of relation formation.
Yeah, like a few things that I wanted to just comment on, guys, because, when we mentioned about, like, definitions of masculinity, like, one of the best ones I ever heard was, or like, no, what does it mean to be a good man? Was a good man is a man who, I think, and again, I'm going to butcher it, but it's something along the lines of, a good man works to make everyone in the world feel safe, including other men and himself. So the word safety, I think, is really, really key. What else? There was some beautiful ones there. Like,
I really like that quote. I've never heard that before.
I think I heard it on the Man Enough podcast. They ask all the guests, like, what does it mean to be man enough, or what does it mean to be a good man? And I think it was Justin Baldoni said it. It was just, and it hit me like a train. I was like, that's it, because we often as men, I think part of our identity and our value is tied to how we provide, how we serve, how we give to others. But if we equate our worth or our value to things outside of us, well, then we're actually outsourcing it. We were talking about, like, not being good enough, right? Well, if we ever feel not good enough in any area of our lives, that's not our belief. That's something that we internalized by something that happened to us. And a lot of work, like a lot of work I do with my clients, is just getting to the root cause of that. Because when you spend some time, and sometimes it takes fucking ages, sometimes it's so hard to actually find the moment or the voice or the person who consciously or unconsciously, purposely or accidentally inflicted that wound on us. Something happened and we internalized it and made it mean something about ourselves. We're not good enough. And I often ask clients when they have those moments of breakthrough, it's like, what would it mean if you had always been good enough? And what if you are good enough? So, if our self-worth, the key word is self, we define that. And so if we are all enough, like, as men, as human beings, and if we can really tune into any part, any voice in our heads, any subconscious thoughts that say that we're not, like, get curious about where they come from, because our self-worth isn't tied to anything. Like, we are all by definition worthy and all good enough.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think we're subjected to so much external programming when we're young. You think of our formative years, we're told by our parents what we should be, society what we should be, going through school, which can be bloody arduous, secondary school, bullying, etc. You know, you're told by your peers what you are or what you're not. And at that age, where you don't really have an understanding of the external world and what other people are experiencing, you're a bit of a narcissist. It is all about you.
Yeah.
So how people treat you is about you and something wrong with you, and you know, all those interactions. And something else you mentioned there as well, James, is I think there's almost like an air of caution we all need when we tie our identity to any one thing. You know, and you mentioned that, Oisin, about BJJ being injured, is once you're tied to one thing, whether it's by choice or it's taken away from you, you're always going to struggle with identity on some level. You know, and I see it a lot with people that identify with bodybuilders that want to step away from the sport. Well, I've always been defined by bodybuilding, and if I'm not looking a certain way, then that must mean I'm less of a person, or, you know.
Footballers at the end of their careers, like, don't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah. I think even things like your professional status or title, whatever you've given yourself, or whether even as a, you know, that's probably an awful example. I was, you know, as a partner, let's say, like as a husband is, yeah, I am a husband, but also like there are many other parts of me to my world. I'm not defined by that one thing. And I think like when it's anything that all of these things are facets of us. They don't define us. I'm conscious of time. Has anyone that is watching, because we've had quite a bunch of viewers on this, has anyone got any questions at this point? I apologise if I've missed them because we've had loads of people joining. Do throw them in the questions box. I've had loads of people trying to join, but I don't know. But I don't know them, and I'm not going to let them in. Sorry, guys. I'm assuming guys anyway. But yeah, no, I think they're all valuable, and that is, in terms of like us all being equal and having these conversations and shit. Like, again, I'm not trying to patronise you or anything like that.
No, you're okay.
Hope he hasn't seen that. Like, you know,
it's learning from me, because again, I always think back to like, where have these beliefs come from? And it's from being bullied for so long in school, and like always put down below, and even aspects of my childhood as well that I'd often look back to, as you were talking about. There's always this point, there's always this one moment where maybe that's the point where you started to feel less, or you started to, and again, a lot of my stuff would be related to childhood and stuff where I found difficult. But one thing actually, and it was discussed, so I'm going on a complete tangent because this was discussed a good bit back, about the vulnerability and accountability aspect. And even I was just thinking about like when I was really struggling last year, and you were talking about like finding someone to speak to, like whether that be a close friend or someone that's going to listen to you rather than try and fix the issue. So my mom would be one of these people that fixes the issue. She's a therapist, so but she'd really struggle with all of us, and because she absolutely loves us, and I tell you, I don't know where I'd be without that woman. So when I was really struggling last year, first person I went to, of course, was her, because it felt safe with her, because she's the person that easiest to talk to, always chatting to me, whatever. And so I was telling her I wasn't feeling great, and I was like, I really need help. And obviously her first thing was trying to fix the problem. But it was easy to be vulnerable with her, so I was being very vulnerable with my mum. However, with my dad, it's not the same thing, and I feel like with most maybe fathers, it's probably the same way. But my dad would be a person that holds you very accountable, and so without both of those, I don't think I would have made it out where I was, because I went to my mum, and my mum was like, okay, can we do this, and asking me about my feelings and stuff. And then I went to my dad, and my dad was like, you're going to be okay, you'll be fucking fine, you'll get over it. And I was like, okay. So both of these aspects actually connected together, and just as you were speaking about like the type of person that I would want to be, I want to try and be a combination of both of those. And I think for people as well, is like with speaking out or speaking to people, or say chatting to somebody, don't be afraid to talk to multiple different people and get maybe the aspect of someone who you can be really vulnerable around, and then someone who's gonna sometimes call you out in your shit, or someone that's going to hold you very accountable. So the mix of both is brilliant, because sometimes I feel like you can feel trapped that, oh, I already spoke about this, or I already spoke about this to someone and it didn't help, or this didn't help. It's the same as like you're talking about your therapist, where you're on with a new therapist. I think I went through like 5 or 6 different therapists till I found one that could listen to me the way that I wanted to be listened to. It's the same as fitness coaches. A fitness coach, someone could go to Dan, or someone could come to my coaching and then be like, Oisin is an absolutely shit fitness online coach, I don't like him at all. And they could go to you, Dan, and just because you speak to them in a different way, they'd be like, he's absolutely brilliant. It's not that I'm a bad coach, or you're a bad coach, or anyone is a bad coach. Sometimes we just click and connect with different people and take different words from others. And I think that's one thing I've taken from this conversation as well, is like, don't be afraid to speak to different types of people. Some people that can hold you accountable, and some people that you can be very vulnerable around.
Yeah, compatibility is a massive piece. You know, that's objective. You know, sometimes chemistry and compatibility, it isn't a reflection of someone being a good or a bad coach. Like the thing you mentioned about the accountability versus vulnerability piece, I think as human beings, as men, one of the most powerful things, because the tendency for men, for example, a generalization, is that someone comes to us with a problem, we've learned that to prove our value, we try and fix. Yeah. So that's our go-to, right? One of the most incredible questions that we as men can learn to ask, and coach our partners to ask us if we go to them, or our friends, is, what do you need? Do you need me to listen? Or do you need me to listen, or do you need advice? Like, do you want an ear to listen, or do you want solutions? Do you want to problem solve? Because that then gives them the choice. And if they don't know, well, then you can try. You can then use your better judgment, or you can try to, okay, let's have a look at solutions. And that might make them feel like shit. So instead, it's just like, no worries, man, just talk to me. Tell me what you're going through. That's like, they need someone to hold them and just sit with them in the shit, rather than, right, let's fix it. So asking the question is one of the most powerful things that we can do. Yeah, as a friend, as a partner, all of it.
That's the intimacy part there as well.
Yeah.
Why it's so important to cultivate that trust between a relationship, in that, you know, you could have a friend that's doing their very best, but if you've got an open, honest and transparent relationship, it's like, mate, shut up. I didn't ask you. I'm just venting. Just let me vent, you know. And bless her, my mum is like that. You know, I think my mum is a fixer. So bless her. I know that she's hugely empathetic, so she takes everything on. But I also know that if I just want to vent, I'm going to get really frustrated with her. I'm not going to shout at her or anything like that, but I'm just not going to, bless her. But then, you know, there are other people, or, you know, unfortunately, sometimes that is where talk therapy and therapists are, that's their job. You know, if you haven't got that avenue in your life, and I know a certain amount of privilege comes for that, if you can pay for it or whatever it is. And NHS waiting lists now are up to 13 weeks, I think, in some places. But if you haven't got access to it, that is where an external, non-biased party can be really, because they can give you objective views. If you do want feedback, they can just look at the circumstances as you've played them back to them and give you some objective advice, or help you navigate a conversation so things make sense better to you as well.
I think sometimes the biggest fear is starting therapy or going to someone to speak is that you don't know what to speak about, or you don't know how to put it into words. That's actually why I love the therapists that I, there's loads of them out there, was art therapy. And I am not an artist, or I'm not anything. All I had to do before I went in the first time was just draw a random ass picture and bring it into him, and he would speak to me about this picture, about what was going on in the picture, and then get me to speak via that. But I think the biggest thing is, like, you're paying someone to go into a room, or you have a session booked with someone whose job to speak to you. You do not have to be worried about what you want to speak to them about. It's like, if you feel really worried about starting it, that's on them. They'll get you talking. It'll happen. Because that was my biggest fear before starting. My biggest fear before going was like, I'm going to go into this room with this person. I'm not going to know what to say. I'm not going to be able to get my feelings out there, and it's going to be quite difficult. And sometimes that takes time. Sometimes it takes a couple of sessions, or sometimes it takes even sitting down and seeing what the person moves around like in the room, so that you can feel safe and feel vulnerable alongside them. But I think that's a huge thing with the therapy. Sometimes it's really difficult to word how you're feeling, or word what's going on.
Look at something I sort of have noticed throughout this conversation over the last hour, that at times I think each of us, the four of us, at some point have kind of gone, oh, I don't know if that answers the question, or sorry, I went off on a tangent, right? We've all kind of done that in a way. And that feels to me like we're scared we haven't answered the question correctly. We're scared we've got it wrong. And when it comes to therapy, right, it's like, I don't know what to talk about. So under there's like this subconscious belief that, I could get this wrong. I might get therapy wrong. I might not do this correctly. What if I go in there and the therapist expects me to, know what I want to talk about? So because I don't know what I want to talk about, that means I'm going to get it wrong. So maybe I'm not going to go, or I'm going to have resistance to going into this room. And that's just, it's okay to not know. You can't get it wrong. It's fine if you don't know what's going on. That's the reason you go, because usually the disconnect, or the breakdown, or the anxiety, or the depression, or whatever, is because there's a disconnect. And probably because you've become disconnected from your emotions, your emotional body, your feelings. There's stuff inside you that you don't know, you can't articulate, see, and feel clearly. So that's the process. It's just going in with a problem that you don't know how to fix. Like, you're not meant to know sometimes.
Yeah. And also, there isn't a right answer. There is no wrong way of doing it because there's no right way of doing it. There is a very individual way of doing it. And whatever leads you down the path which leads you ultimately feeling happier and fulfilled, that's the correct answer. So, you know, again, it's one of those things, isn't it? It doesn't matter what's right or wrong on anyone else's terms. Does that make sense to you? And if it does, then that's the correct answer in itself. Something that you mentioned there, actually, which was when you was talking about you don't know the words for it. I think that's often, and I feel like these are so separate sidebars. Perhaps we'll revisit another time because I'm so hugely grateful for you two giving up, you three giving up your time. Is that this expectation that all men are equipped with the communication skills? We all have this ability to verbalise and articulate exactly what we're feeling at any one time, whereas men or women are like, I don't think this is a gendered thing. Is people don't necessarily have those communication skills if you haven't taken a vested interest in exploring that avenue. So if I'd never been to therapy, I wouldn't be able to say, probably beyond happy, angry, sad, frustrated. That was my emotional spectrum in my head. Obviously, there are massive other emotions out there, but I didn't have the vocabulary for that. I didn't know how to articulate that. So how that spills over is, you know, getting angry or getting short-tempered and all these other things because I couldn't put the words into place. And I think an expectation is, oh, be vulnerable because that's an easy thing to do. Go talk to someone because that's an easy thing to do. And oh yeah, they're definitely going to listen to you and they're going to do something about it. So it's like three impossible standards there in one and things that we haven't been taught. So it's only on your own self-developmental journeys that you actively seek out those skills. And that's where the true magic is.
I wish they had like a button you could press and it would book you in for a therapy session. It would get someone to ring you. Because I remember when I started, I was so afraid. And this is only last year as well, which is so funny. But I told my mum to ring the therapist, don't tell me when it is and bring me. Just do not tell me when it is because I don't want to know because I'm too afraid. I don't know what to say. Yeah, so I said, as an adult, like I was getting my mum to book the therapy session. But she came to my room, I think it was a couple of weeks later and was like, oh, we're going to McDonald's, do you want to come along? And no one says no to McDonald's. I was like, yes, of course, especially if it's bought for me. And I arrived outside the therapist's house and I was like, oh shit. But I always think about that. I wish there was just a button that you could just press and this person would ring you, because it's easy to just click that button and then from there it's the same as, like, I always describe things in the fitness terms. In fitness terms, it's easier to go to the gym if you have a class to book because you book that class, and it's easier to press that button than it is to get up, mentally prepare yourself to go to the gym, pack your bag to go to the gym. But if you have that button pressed and have the gym booked, you're going to go because you are expected to be there. And so with therapy, I wish there was a similar aspect that we could do. There might be somewhere, but someone needs to invent it maybe.
I think just on a broader scale, that's like any behaviour change.
Yes.
Like any behaviour change, it's
accountability.
Pardon?
It's accountability.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
literally, if you got the class, like if you're booked, you're going to go.
To change behaviour, you first have to challenge it, and that means getting really, really uncomfortable. Because I think there's like a safer trajectory for being uncomfortable in your own shit right now, because I know how unhappy and uncomfortable I am about that. Whereas trying something new, well, I don't know what the end result of that is. Is it going to be worse? I don't really want to make it worse. Like, I'm unhappy now, but that could be worse than how unhappy I am. And yeah, there's a whole separate conversation to that. But gents, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you both, and thank you for contributing so much to these chats. I'm going to post it so people can recap it and everything else. Yeah, I really appreciate you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Dan, for setting it up, and thanks for teaching me a lot. I have a lot to know.
Thanks for teaching me. Thanks for teaching me.
We've all taught each other, guys. And one thing, just before we go, we were talking about struggling to articulate emotions. An app that anyone can download. I think it's either How Are You Feeling or How Am I Feeling. It's literally, I
think I've got it on my phone that I'm looking at. That's where I've got it.
If anyone of any gender struggles with, I don't know how to say how I feel, it gives you like a prompt twice a day, and it gives you like high energy, low energy, positive, negative.
It's all color
coded, and it's an amazing tool to help you articulate how you're feeling. So I'd recommend anyone download that if they struggle.
That has a share tool as well. So if it's like a friend that maybe you can't have these conversations with, or a partner, is you can sync up your accounts.
Nice.
It's a free account, a free thing. So if you don't see them, you can like let them know where you're at with stuff.
Yeah, love that. Just wanted to add that in before we go, guys, but this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and really, really great to connect with you both.
Thanks for everyone for tuning in as well. Cheers.
Thanks a million. See you later, guys.
Bye.